Army knife of database development.
Thank you, Turtle. I'd like to acknowledge this very cute animal picture because it's amazing. My name's Damian. I've been in software development since the late 19th century, 20th century, late 1900s. We're off to a good start. Dates are hard. I'm a consultant CTO here in Brisbane. I also run a lot of software architecture and microservices training with my company Stack Mechanics. So if that's something that you're interested in bringing to your team or to your company, please come and have a chat because I love helping people not go wrong with microservices through training. Not on Twitter anymore because it's evil. I'm on Mastodon occasionally and there's some websites there. So yeah, quick agenda. So essentially I'm going to be talking about, Marten and SQL. This came up, I gave a talk in, was it November I was here? Talking about messaging and microservices. And I think it was just a throwaway comment about me getting a lot of mileage out of Postgres as a data store in microservices. And got into a little bit of a chat about it after the talk around this tool called Marten that I'm going to talk about. And there was a fair bit of interest, so I went, well, I could come back and talk about that. So here I'm is. So most of my talks have a history lesson component to it because I'm old and I like people knowing where stuff came from. So I'm going to talk a little bit about history. I'm going to talk a little bit about Postgres. Who's used Postgres? Oh, everyone. Cool. No, not quite everyone. A lot of people. Okay, so that's cool. So I can skip over that. But not many people have used Marten, and that's the interesting bit. One person, two people. Okay, few people. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Marten, what it is, the basics, how to use it, and essentially some tips and tricks, patterns, anti-patterns that I've come to love over a couple of years. I've been using Marten since about 2018, on and off. It's sort of become my, like I said, Swiss Army knife. It's kind of my go-to stack now is Postgres and Marten. So when you use something for a while, you end up with some lessons and some scars. So that's what I want to talk about. It's going to be a fairly informal talk. I've got a handful of slides with some history, and then I'm basically just going to dive into some code and pretty informal. Open to questions the whole time. This is a fairly relaxed, demo-heavy chat, basically. Cool. So, history. Who's used relational databases? Everyone? Okay, cool. Who knows this? So yeah, the relational database concept was sort of floated in 1970. There were various sort of implementations. Oracle were the first really big one in 79. Who used SQL Server 6.5? A few people, excellent. Yeah, so there was Sybase, which ran on IBM mainframes. Microsoft forked that and started with SQL Server. 6.5 was their first release of that fork. And then they did a complete rebuild, and because 6.5 was fairly awful. A few people remember, yeah. It was bad. They rewrote that, release 7 in 98. For some context for .NET people, essentially. Postgres started as a project inside the University of California at Berkeley in the mid-80s. And sort of was internal to the university project for a long time, and then finally spun out as an official open source piece of software in 96. So a little bit of history, but I think we know that now. Cool. Postgres, is an open source relational database. I like it because it's fast. It's free. Because it is open source. What that means is if you're on one of the big cloud vendors, it's usually a lot cheaper than the others. It's lightweight. I've run it on a Raspberry Pi for some IoT prototype stuff, and I've stress tested the living daylights out of it on a Raspberry Pi, and it works quite well in a Docker container. It's extensible. There's lots of plugins for like GIS stuff. It's huge in the GIS. Anyone use it in the GIS world? Yeah, massive in GIS. Lots of extensions to it, and it's really reliable. I don't know if it still does, but for a long time it ran a lot of the world's DNS. Like a lot of the top level domain registries and servers were running on it. So yeah, it's pretty cool. For the .NET folks, Microsoft and Azure have a really big investment in it. So if you're interested in using it in Azure, they've got a whole team sort of developing high performance stuff out. There's an amazing woman named Claire Giordano who is on Mastodon, who, if that's kind of your jam, follow Claire, she's really cool. And she runs a lot of conferences around open source Postgres. It's also a really good choice in .NET because there's a really good provider for it, like a SQL provider for it. Works really well with Dapper, works well with EF Core, and a pretty good choice for .NET. So, some more history. NoSQL. Waiting for the giggles. I rewatched that video today. It's far too problematic for me to play. It's a few years old now, but if you know, you know. So the term NoSQL sort of became fairly common in 2009. There was a conference around it, around describing these sort of non-relational, mostly open source databases. A lot of the bigger companies were using to scale. Lots of sort of distributed stuff, sharded stuff, where the sort of like relational integrity and relational model really didn't kind of work. There's a bunch of different things get lumped into this NoSQL thing. There's key value stores, there's graph databases, there's document databases, there's time series databases, there's object databases, and a couple of more, esoteric ones. But since the hype cycle, document databases sort of have stabilized as good general purpose databases if you know how to model the data. And where a lot of people got into problems, and this will be a common theme if you've seen any of my other talks, is where you jump on technology and not understand the modeling, you go horribly wrong, which a lot of people did in the sort of 2010s. A lot of people dived into Mongo or other things and just made horrible, horrible messes. So yeah, if you know how to model document databases, which I probably won't get into too much tonight, they're a fairly good choice. Like I said, they're sort of fairly default choice for me at the moment, particularly in sort of microservices world. Which brings me to Marten. So Marten is a .NET API, essentially. It's a transactional document store and event store based on Postgres. I'm not going to touch the event sourcing stuff tonight at all, because I've never used it in production. And my personal rule is if I haven't used it in production, you're not going to hear me talk about it. It's a little pet peeve of mine. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the document store. So Marten has a fun history. Who's heard of RavenDB? Cool, about half the room. So RavenDB, I didn't mention on this list of databases here. RavenDB is a Windows-based document store essentially aimed at .NET developers. It comes with a lot of opinions. It comes with some opinionated people, and it's let down a whole bunch of people. Interesting. Did anyone see the news today? Yeah, a few people. So who's heard of Jepsen? A couple of people. So Jepsen is I guess it's a test protocol for testing usually sort of NoSQL databases. And basically, it's a stress test of how reliable a database is and what conditions it will fail under. And they go through a lot of sort of publicly available and open source databases and go, here's where it fails, ACID or CAP or whatever else. And beautiful timing today, I saw they released a annihilation of RavenDB and what is a transaction. So good timing. Anyway, the Marten is a natural predator of a raven. So the story is Jeremy Miller. Does anyone remember Structure Map? Yeah, a few people. So Jeremy Miller, sort of quite big in the .NET, alt.NET open source community. He worked at a company, they used Raven a lot, and really got let down by that. It's amusing at the time. I worked in a company that used Raven a lot and also got let down by that. And various open source projects were spun up to replace Raven from people's product and tech stack. And ironically, at least two of them have Raven sledges in the name. So yes, he Googled what is the natural predator of a raven and found a marten, which is...
The other Raven sledge is even better, right?
Quoth the raven nevermore. This is a marten, and they're very cute. And you know, so the rule of good open source products. This is Loren's rule of good open source products: is they have to have a cute animal mascot. So Marten gets a tick from that. It's at martendb.io. So that's the general history of Marten. It's all there. The docs are there. The docs are great. What I'm essentially going to do is just run through some quick demo scenarios of stuff I've learned. Again, some basics, how to use it, and some stuff I've learned. So now I'm basically going to go into code. This is all on GitHub, and I'll post it in the meetup link with the slides afterwards. So it is all up there. Now we see, does the projector thing work? Yes, it does. Fantastic. All right. How readable is that? Somewhat readable. It could go up. Go big or go home. Not that way. That way. All right. We'll fight on. I'm gonna start here anyway. So the first thing. Does everyone know about Azure Data Studio? Yeah. Yes. Particularly if you're on a Mac, but definitely if you're using Postgres, get on the Azure Data Studio train. I've used pretty much every Postgres, except for JetBrains, of course. Data grip, built into Rider.
I was just going to do the needful and ask, how do you feel about Data Grip or Postgres? Not because they sponsor it.
Not because they sponsor it.
But because I use Data Grip Postgres and I have not used this.
Yeah, right. Data grip is great, and it's built into Rider, and I live in Rider. And you know, Data grip will connect to everything. There's just something about the workflow in it that just doesn't gel with me. It's a great product. It just it doesn't gel. This also, if you're doing a bunch of SQL Server stuff on a Mac, there's a bunch of extensions that make SQL Server admin stuff quite easy in Azure Data Studio. So as a sort of fairly lightweight, useful editor, it's a good one.
10x simpler than Data Grip.
Yeah. And the data grip thing where, like, it's powerful where you have to refresh the schemas and stuff like that. Like, it's just, I find it a little bit awkward. This one, less so. So, yes, I am able to zoom. I believe I'm able to zoom in. Yes. Because it's Electron, I can zoom the whole thing. Yeah, that's right. Code in a browser. More.
Perfect, I think.
Cool. So I'm not going to go into all of the syntax of Postgres. A lot of people have used it anyway, but I'm going to create a database, create a user with a very secure password, and grant some permissions. So I'm just running Postgres in Docker because I have too many different projects where I have to jump across too many different infrastructure things, so I kind of live in Docker for that. So yeah, I've got this database called Marten Demo, which should have a lot in it. Cool. So on my list, now I'm going to have to learn how to zoom JetBrains properly. In my repo too, I've got a couple of just helpful snippets like how to create a database, which is not very readable there, but I will get there. Cool. Sorry? I'm not going to bother zooming to that right now because I'm not going to need it. So I've got a very, very simple little console app that I'm going to start with here. You know what, this is going to actually be easier in VS Code. Again, I live in Rider, but for demos, zooming all of VS Code is much. Sorry?
Rider has presentation mode.
It does, but I can't learn new things, Andy.
It is absolutely awful.
All right. Cool. I've got a really simple console app here. The details don't matter too much. I'm creating a Serilog logger, I'm creating an autofat container builder. I'm scanning the modules for assemblies, scanning the assembly for modules, and then I'm just resolving a command named what I type in, and then running it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show you what it looks like to use Marten. Essentially, it's got a couple of really big first-class concepts. One is a document store. Okay, a document store is something that you create as a singleton inside of your app. So again, because I'm using AutoFac, I've got a data module here. And if you ignore my commented out code, essentially I'm getting a connection string and I'm saying return a document store for this connection string. Auto create the schema objects, and I'll get into that and I'll ignore high-low stuff. And I'm returning that as a single instance of document store. People familiar with AutoFac in general? A little bit. Do we know what it is? Yes, IOC container. So essentially I'm just registering, saying when I ask for a dependency, I don't use that newfangled built-in dependency injection stuff in ASP.NET, it's broken. When I ask for an iDocument store, this is how it gets created. So I've got this command, I'm going to create some products in my database. And it looks pretty simple. I want to create, from my singleton document store, I want to create a session. And a session's kind of like a unit of work. If familiar with unit of work. Yep, cool. So I want to create a session. You can have this kind of fully tracked session thing. For web stuff, I use a lightweight session, which just has less proxies and tracking and stuff like that. It's much of a muchness. So I've got two ways of storing things, and this is how simple it is. I've got, this class called product. Which IntelliSense isn't working because I never use this to write code. Model. I have this very simple product. And so, right, I can create a product called ice cream and I can stick it in my session. And I can say session.store the ice cream, right? Or I can, pass it a collection of things. I've got a list of products here. I've got some Coke and I've got a donut, and I can store that IEnumerable of things. And then because it's a unit of work, I call saves changes. So it looks a lot like, if you were using EF Core or something like that. And that's as easy as it is. Now I'm going to just zoom this one up. Where am I? So if I were to run .NET run, sorry?
Can you go big?
I can go big. It's just ruined everything. If I go .NET run, what was it? Create products. That's the stuff. Cool, done. Okay, so that's run that thing. Now if I go into here, to my Marten demo, and I refresh this, what we're going to see is it's created a table for me. Called mt.doc_product. Okay, because I saved a product thing. MT is Marten, and it's a document because we're a document store.
And it just takes it off the class name.
Yep.
So you'll track the class.
Yes, I will come to that. I will come to that. So essentially, it's a document store. So I spelled ice cream wrong. So how did I do that? So the table's quite simple. It's got an ID column. So we need an ID. I'm going to talk about IDs. And then it's got a JSON blob there. Okay, and then it's got some other metadata, a version stamp for some concurrency checking, and a .NET type. That's for, you can store class hierarchies in there. So you could have, a bunch of sort of child classes of stuff and then all in the one table. But that's basically how quick it is to just call it and throw something there and saving. So initially I got into Marten, I was doing some really rapid prototyping of stuff and I'm like, I don't know what the schema of this is going to be like yet. It was just pure sort of R&D. And over time I went, actually, this is quite good. Until you need to refactor, and I will get to that. Now, the sort of secret sauce that I've got in here to make this work is when I initialized my document store, I've said auto create schema objects. So you have that as an option and it will go, you want to store a product? Cool, I'll store a product for you and it will create the table. And it actually creates a whole bunch of user-defined functions to kind of do upserts and stuff like that. Does a bunch of stuff. You can turn this off if you've got to run change scripts by a DBA or something crazy like that. But really, I've got a lot of mileage of just leaving it on automatic. There is a gotcha which I'll... Sorry?
You can turn this off if you're again too fan.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, you can turn it off. You can, put stuff in, a DB up migration type thing.
Can you generate out the DDL with this?
Yes, you can. Yeah, so I'll jump into the gotcha. So the gotcha now is I have run into a situation in a table where I was storing many, many, many millions of rows and we wanted to add some indexes to it. And I'll get into how Marten will automatically create that. And I wanted to do that on a relatively under IO resource database server in Azure using an app service where it would get torn down. And it did time out. And because of the way I was bootstrapping the whole thing, it was like creating it, timing out, trying to create it again, and it all kind of fell over. So, but, I was many, many, many millions of rows on a fairly underpowered, under IO resource database server on Azure before I hit an issue. So, like if you're doing web scale, dare I say it, you can run into an issue in day-to-day. You're really not likely to run into an issue with it doing auto schema create. Unless you're coming here as a process where, you're locked down and you can't do that, but that's a whole other one. So that is a gotcha, is generating out the migration DDL and finding a nice way to run it if you're in a completely PaaS environment can get a little hairy. But you're going to hit that whenever you've got a database with millions and millions and millions of rows and you're in a PaaS environment. So first gotcha there, that can hurt you at enough scale, but at that scale, you've really got to manage your database migrations fairly carefully anyway. So, but yeah, particularly for smaller stuff, prototyping, having an auto create schema is just magic. It is absolute magic. And that's how we create products. So kind of like our basic use is super simple. So if I were to say then, actually I will say this. So one of the things I said is you do need an identifier for everything. And it will accept a number, a string, or a GUID, or a UUID in Postgres speak. And it behaves slightly differently depending on what your ID is. If you're using a string, which this product is, you need to specify it. Sort of makes sense, right? If you're using a string, you've got to... If you don't have an ID column on there, or an ID property on your class, it will blow up when you try to save something. Because it doesn't know what to do. You can specify if you want your ID to be called identifier, you can specify what it is, but by default, by convention, it'll look for a property called ID and run with that. If it's a string, you have to specify it. Yeah, pretty simple. If it is a GUID, you can leave it blank, it will specify it for you. So I generally, out of habit, will explicitly give something a new GUID if I'm using GUIDs. But it will do it. And then the other thing is if you have, customers is a GUID. So, I'll do that one. I'll create customers, .NET run, create customer. So, yay, done. Done, cool. So, I've specified a GUID there. So we can come into here and we can say select star from empty doc product customer. Cool. So it's created the UUID there. The last one is if you use a number. Who's heard of high-low? A few people. So in .NET land, I think Hibernate was the first thing to come up with this as an algorithm. So basically, if I were to say create an order, order has an ID, but it's an int. And when I create the order, actually, let's just walk through here first. So I'm creating a session, which is disposable, so I'm using it. I want to, here's how to query it. So I want to say session query of customer. Yeah. And I want the first one where the email equals my email. Yeah. So full link support. When I say full link support, you can trick it up, much like you can trick up anything. If you ask it to do really wild link functions, like it'll blow up and give you an error that it needs some sort of primitive support. But stuff like that works really well. So, yeah. Whereas I think the Raven syntax, has it gotten better? Has anyone used Raven recently? No. Yeah. Sorry, safe by default, Todd. Yeah, link support's really good. So yeah, I can say where the email equals that, get me the first one, and it knows how to do that. And I can say get me all the products where the price is greater than $3, and I want a list of them. And then I've got. And then delete the rest? No, it doesn't do that. You've played this game before, haven't you? Yeah, so that's a Raven DB gotcha. Is it has a automatic record set capping, which is a default of 1,000. You can turn it off, but it's like safe by default. But what it will do is if you were to do some like correlated subquery and go delete the things where the customer isn't in all the list of good customers, it will return the list of good customers the first 1,000, then delete everyone else. And people got very, very burnt by that. And the response was you're holding it wrong. Which is why a lot of people built alternatives. I hope Oren's not watching this. He's having a bad day.
Was it like 128 or something? Or something weird?
There was one thing that was 1,000. Yeah, it's been a while. So question?
So with the Postgres, can you now do a enumerated type instead? Enumerable.
Yep.
Instead of the two lists, and then do another query inside, or is that?
That's an excellent question, and if that JetBrains license doesn't work, I'm giving you the other one. Cool. Oh, it has.
Yeah, my guy checked it.
Sorry.
My guy checked it already.
All right. Oh, so it's no good?
No, it said it was redeemed. I've got that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, you can have the other one then, because that's an excellent question, and I'm so glad you asked.
Question for the stream.
Sorry.
Repeat the question.
I'll get to it anyway. I will get to it, because it is a big gotcha. It's a big gotcha, and it's all right. I got you covered on this one. But no, this is quite safe. So I'm creating an order here with the customer ID and an order status of pending and an order date of date time offset now, and then a product list. Okay, and so if I run that, let's say create order. Does anyone like my hand-rolled command line parsing? Oh, how about that? That's because I spelt things wrong. Such error handling. This is not production code. Cool, done. I've got to go and look at the order. So I've got an order, and you can see in here, if you look in the JSON, this is the other thing that I really like about Azure Data Studio. If you've got a JSON type, you just click into it, JSON. So yeah, you can see what it's done. It's creating a JSON document there. But it's given me an order ID of 1. And so I will dive quickly into how hilo works. MT hilo. So it's created another table here called MT hilo. You can see down here. So basically what it does when you use a high-low algorithm, it needs to store for any table type what the, like where you're at with IDs. But rather than So when you save it, it goes, hey, I can use ID 1 because my last known high value was 0, right? So it'll pick the next value. But that would be inefficient if you were doing a lot of writes, because then every time you went to write, you would have to go and look at this table and go, what ID can I have? Do you remember, anybody remember select from Joule in Oracle? Us old guys. So yeah, Oracle used to have to do that. It didn't have like your sort of auto-incrementing identity like SQL Server did. You would have to write a stored procedure that said, go and get the next ID from Joule and use that. I don't know why it was called Joule. There would have been some reason from the 70s. So basically what this does is the first time I go to save an order, Marten has gone what high value has been used for order before, and it would be told 0. And it goes, cool, I bags the first 50. And then it just keeps that in memory. And it can use 50. And keen eyes might have noticed I specified that as 50. So basically every time you want to get an ID, it'll give you a block of 50. And basically it keeps that block. So like when I ran this, it went, I need to save orders. That's an integer, what's my high-low? And it goes, you've got the first 50, and it keeps that in memory. If I run this again, high value is 1, and what we should see is that's 51. So basically the running process got a block of 50. So if you had like clusters, they would each get a block of 50. Now, a lot of people will hate this because they don't have contiguous IDs. So, you know, that can hurt. You can have smaller blocks if you are starting and stopping an app a whole bunch of times. But that's how that's how it gets a distributed way of using IDs without having to use an identity incrementing column. Love it, hate it. That's how it works. Yeah, so if I had multiple processes running, they would call in and within a transaction say, hey, what was the last ID you gave out? Or what was the last range you gave out? And so if my first process was still running, say we've got a web process, and another, like I spun up another instance in my cluster, it would say, hey, I need to save order 2, and it goes, cool, you can have 101, and it will store that.
Where does it actually store like the next chunk that's available?
In this table. So basically what happens is before it went to save my order, it says, hey, can I have a range? And it knew that the last one it gave out was 51. Sorry, it knew the last one it gave out was 1. So it said, okay, you can have 51. You can have a block of 50 from 51.
Oh, okay,
Yeah. And so then, you know, if I started another process, it would get given 101.
Okay.
Yep.
Are they allocated, like check in, check out, or is it just keep stacking up?
It's a range, yeah,
Just don't use those IDs?
that don't get reused. So yeah, a lot of people hate it because like, I don't get a nice, built-in security stops you from ID or enumeration attacks. Not security advice. But that's how a high-low algorithm works anyway. So you get allocated a block. It might even, no, it isn't there. Cool. It probably uses, I actually don't know the answer to this, it probably uses this version stamp to go which process asked it for the, I've not dug into the internals, but that would be my assumption. Cool, so that's how it stores, that's how it has. So yeah, so for identity, you've got strings you have to specify, GUIDs, or numbers, and it will use a high-low algorithm for that. Again, if you were building something that was not super clustered and did have to stop a whole bunch of times, you would probably use a smaller range. Cool, so that's how we create stuff and how we query stuff. Let's go and have a look at what else I've got in here. Yeah, again, so this kind of looks like my orders. So find orders. it's going to say I found 2 orders for Damian, hopefully. Yep, cool, found 2 orders. So what I've done here is I've gone and found the customer ID by querying my customer, and it's found my ID, and then I can say, you know, that should all make sense for anyone that writes .NET, right? Not lost anyone here? Cool. And again, I'm doing a to list. I'm coming to that. I think that's the most interesting stuff from this one. Oh, no, that's not. So here's a good example. This is going to fall down in a production system over time because I'm going to be doing a lot of searching on something like a customer email or a customer ID in an order. Yeah. So Postgres is pretty smart in that I can do, and I'm going to dive a little bit further into this, because it's storing it all right in JSON. So you know I've got my orders there. I can actually pull out, there's a really powerful query syntax within Postgres JSON to query into those JSON documents, which is really cool. So I can do stuff like select ID data and this just wild syntax.
I was just going to say, do you find the syntax easy though?
So
You must have written a lot of it then.
I've written a little bit of it. My gift to everybody here is this Bible of JSON syntax in Postgres.
Their documentation is fairly...
Yeah. So I found this on Medium, Hackanoon, and I have this in my Notes app all of the time, and I have copied and pasted it with sources into the repo, because if you do want to play in this space, you are going to want this. But you can query right into subcollections, you can replace elements within subcollections, you can do a whole lot.
Using it to do data migrations is fine, right?
Yeah. So it is an answer to your... So actually, to come into your gotcha, and I realize I'm jumping around. This is very much a sort of informal, I'm showing you my toys. The refactoring gotcha is hard. If you rename a type, it's not going to know what to do with it. So you can say, hey, this type is in this table, but it can get tricky. So I've sort of come up with 2 different patterns that I've used. One is where, again, in a very much R&D system that sort of gotten it into production, and I realized, you know, when you sort of go through the process of developing a system and you go, actually, this thing that I thought was this is actually completely different shaped and has a different semantic and a different name, and we need to refactor everything. If you're using something like Unity Framework and SQL Server, you could write a migration script that changes the table and does all the data munging, whatever, and then just change your model, and you know, we're good. Less easy here, particularly if you've got auto schema change on. So I've got 2 things. One is you can actually dive in to the table and like alter JSON and patch stuff, and it's fairly hideous. Or the other thing I've done is just gone, you know what, it's an entirely new entity, and then just kind of do a kind of like a sort of mini strangler pattern type thing on there, where you go, I'm going to create this new entity here, and for a period I'm going to write to both of them, or have a background task that reads all the ones out of here and pushes it into here, and then we'll, you know, this will be our representation. Yeah, it can be a tricky migration in a sort of complex system. If your migration is just adding properties to something, it's really, really simple. But yes, I have included my Postgres JSON cheat sheet in this repo because you're going to want it. It's one of those things that I check back on all the time because, yeah, the syntax can get a little wild. So yeah, I could say data, I think that's right, from mt doc order. Yeah. And then, you know, if you put it as customer ID. Yep. Done. Yeah, you can do that stuff. One gotcha with Postgres, actually, I think most people know this. If you're coming from SQL Server, all of your column names and table names are everything going to be lowercase, unless you really fight it. If you're really determined to fight it, you can get done, but don't fight it. But yeah, you can query into the JSON and you can get subcollections and patch them and stuff like that.
when you use that, how do you get around that? If you do a database first, have you ever worked out a trick for how to do it nicely when you do database first?
You don't do database first like this. That would be a world of pain.
We've done database first on Postgres databases.
If you're doing database first in Postgres databases with like an ORM like Entity Framework, that's easy.
It always gives us, it always uppercases all the properties. So is there a really easy way to get rid of that?
Oh, in Entity Framework there is. You patch into one of its on-model creating thing and put in a rule. Yeah, if you do database, I tend to be, when I'm using Entity Framework, I tend to be very explicit in my configuration, and I will like specify the table name. Because a lot of the time if I'm using Entity Framework, it's working with some legacy database that is hideous, and I can't do a sort of model first thing. Yeah, question?
So I take it you're not using schema validation. The JSON is
Yeah,
effectively just straight.
correct, yeah. You are running with scissors.
It's not just strings though. That's actually stored as binary representation of the JSON. It's not just.
Yeah, so like I'm not writing the JSON myself. Like it's being serialized from my code. So there is a level there. I mean, again, I can write patches on the sub-properties of sub-elements and this and completely screw it up. But I could do that. I could screw up relational databases really well too. Cool. So anyway, how did I get to this? That's right. Postgres is really smart. I can write these subqueries that go find stuff. But to do that, it's had to kind of crack into a JSON document and read it, which, if we were to take something like, where was it? Find orders. Something like this in, production size system under production size load, that's going to get really slow. Yeah? I'm assuming everyone can see why, because we're going to have to dive into the JSON for everything. So that's not going to scale really well. So Marten has two solutions to that. One of them I've used and went, this really isn't helping me much, and I abandoned it, which is you can actually create, Postgres is cool. You can create indexes on sub-elements of the JSON. So you can say, I want to index data customer ID on this table, and it will index it. And you can specify that in Marten. I don't really bother, because Marten has a cooler way that's better, which is when I've specified it in my data module, this bit that's commented out here, this is just one of the absolute superpowers, I think, of Marten. I'll scroll that up a little bit. So when you're creating the document schema for customer, duplicate the email property in a varchar 200. And when you are creating a schema for the order,
Is that like the Postgres data type that you specify?
exactly, yeah, Postgres data type. When you are creating the schema, so it's creating that schema of like mt doc order, right? When you're creating that, duplicate the customer ID from order and use a UUID. So if I were to rerun find orders, because I've got auto schema create, if I go and have a look at that, mt doc order, so it's created a customer ID column in that table for me, and it's indexed it. Now, indexing a UUID is...
So it automatically indexes it.
Yeah, so it creates all the schema objects for you. Like I said, it creates the table, creates a bunch of user-defined functions. I think it creates some views as well, and it will create all your indexes as well. So if I look at customer, yeah.
I missed that. Did it automatically add it to your previously entered orders as well as part of the
Yes. Which is why on our IO-starved Azure box, adding an index to a very complex document with millions and millions of rows can take some time.
So it's implicitly doing a data migration for you, right, to the new schema.
Yep. Kind of cool, huh? Again, for smaller systems and R&D and discovery, just saves years of your life.
Save in reverse and remove the data automatically as well.
Let's find out.
You comment that out again because
Well,
it's a drop.
Should we find out? Yeah, let's find out.
It does, yeah.
I don't actually know.
Let's try.
Let's find out
No longer
for science.
on email anywhere in your app. So you
Yeah, that's right. So it's created that and it's indexed it. And because it knows that it's indexed it, it's gotten really smart. And if you were to, you can actually plug right into the plumbing, and I've had to do this once. You can kind of write I've forgotten what it is, but you can plug into the plumbing and put just obscene amounts of instrumentation into everything that it's doing, which I've only ever had to do once. I think when I was debugging the thing that I'm going to show you in a moment, which comes back to your question. The one big gotcha in this thing. So it knows now if I go and say, where was that find orders? It knows it has an index on email. And so when it formats its SQL, it's going to query on email rather than querying inside the JSON document, which is, yep. Oh, which is incredible, right? Like it's just without having to think about it. Now, there are still some caveats apply. It's one of those things where this is a really handy tool, but you still need to understand how databases work. Because if you've got an index on something, but you're doing a like on a substring of it, your index is useless, right? Or if you've got an index on something and you write link queries that don't take advantage of that index, it's still going to be slow. And I've seen that, like this thing's running really, really slowly, but we've got this index and it's like, yes, but we've got a query like set of predicates in our query syntax that are just never going to use that index well. So you still need to, it's one of those super handy tools. It's amazing if you understand how databases work and what they do and how indexes work and how they're selected and that sort of stuff. This makes, this is like saved months of my life and I love it, but you still need to know it. Otherwise, you're going to end up, why is my thing slow? So yeah, there are no silver bullets in software, which is why one of my unpopular opinions is you can't call yourself a senior developer unless you know how databases work.
What happens if
Yep.
another version of the program
Yep.
with a slightly different schema without that index deletes
Yeah, and clashes it.
Some good database administrator does it and then the application tries to use it.
So you just said something that didn't exist. Whoops. Sorry. I actually want to find it. So, I mean, this stuff is in indexing. The schema creation stuff is in transactions. I'm sure you could find a scenario where you're trying to run two competing data migration, like schema migration scripts, and it's going to, like one of them is going to be picked to blow up. This doesn't solve that for you.
But then this is an integration database.
Yeah, that's right. Like, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Harcourt. Okay, so I've just commented out that stuff, and I actually am very interested in what it's done. I know the DNA of every line that's been uttered in this book. So what is it doing? Does this still have? Yeah, it's taken it away.
Does it drop the column?
It's dropped the column, yeah. Yeah. So yes, you could definitely deploy two changes with two different people in two different apps on the same table and have them fall over each other. You're not getting around that. Question here and then here. Yep.
Yeah, the duplicate, does it support going into sub-objects? So you've got a contact
Yes.
delivery address. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Question?
Most people don't know this concept of like having this mystical DBA that knows what they're doing. What if we're in a situation where we do have a legacy database that the DBA is basically saying we do want an index in this column? Is it possible for
You wouldn't use this, right?
It's more the context. If you created that column within the database itself,
Yep.
and you had that duplicate line within Marten, is it smart enough to go, oh yeah, cool, it already exists, I don't need to create it, but it's lacking data, does it autofill it? Or is this kind of beyond any?
We're getting into edge cases that I've not tested. So if I was in legacy database situation, this wouldn't be my first tool. Like I said, like where I've had a lot of success with this is in building microservices where every service really is in control of its own data store. And they are very document shaped because you don't have kind of the one third normal form view of everything. There are definitely places where this is not the right tool in the toolkit. But Postgres still can be, because that's what I said, you can still use Entity Framework and use Postgres as the excellent relational database that it is. Yeah, in those kind of scenarios, this is probably not the tool I'd reach for. It will look at the schema and go, this doesn't match what it should match. I don't know what to do. But yeah, it will auto drop columns. I did. Yo.
If Postgres can index on the JSON fields anyway,
Yep.
why do you love the duplicates so much?
I found it to be faster because it is actually a column there. And it's also just easy to work with and easy to see and understand. Yeah, when we did it, we sort of did the JSON indexing and it was a performance improvement. But doing it this way was much faster, particularly if you've got multiple things that you want to search on. Because what it does is it uses the index and the column to find the row and then hydrates it out of the JSON anyway. So yeah, I just found it to be like a big jump in performance over just indexing into the JSON.
I presume you can have multi-column indexes.
Yeah, yeah,
You trade for space, right?
yeah. But space is free, right?
Cloud, right?
It's cloud. And look, that's one of the things that has changed since 1979 is that, and I'm actually being legitimately serious right now, despite the fact that it's me. A lot of the sort of like Dr. Cod's normal forms was around space was expensive. Like storage was really, really expensive. So you did not want to duplicate anything that absolutely did not want to be duplicated because that was a lot of expense, was a lot of speed. I/O was slow. Space was expensive. Unless you are working in extreme edge cases, space is not expensive. I don't know if anyone's here working on something where like space really matters. Yeah, pretty much no. If you are, you've got venture capital paying your AWS bill anyway. Cool. So I'm going to run that again, just put our indexes back. And I'm going to show you the biggest gotcha. Oh no, don't open Rider. That was a mistake. Cool. So they're the sort of basics of like how we bootstrap Marten, how we do IDs, how we get a bunch of scaling bang for our buck just with this duplicate thing on there that would just create stuff and index it and make it really fast. Talked about storing, talked about link querying. I am going to show you the gotcha that got me in production twice until I figured it out. And I'm sharing this with you because it would be unethical otherwise. Data model, I want to put that index back in. It's just there. Cool. So all of that I was doing in that little console app, mainly just so because it was an easy way of just isolating a little function. I also have a very, very, very basic web API. Nothing controversial in there. I'm using autofac again. And I have, what a lot of people might do is have a sort of repository pattern. I don't always, sometimes I do. Doesn't matter. I'm not getting into that philosophical argument tonight. But it is quite conceivable. Let me just run this up while I'm talking. All right, cool. This is a super common thing you might see in any web API using a database. You've got some CRUD stuff. Again, I've simplified this a little bit, but we've got who does web API? Am I talking to an ASP.NET crowd mostly? Okay, cool. So this makes sense. I've got a repository. again, I've bootstrapped it over using autofact to say register product repository as an iProduct repository. In my controller, I've got that injected, and I'm saying get products, and it's going to go, okay, repository get products, spit it out my API. Yeah, inside my repository, I'm just going get me a session. It's disposable, and I'm saying doing a query on product where where the price is greater than $1. Yeah, and then I'm just returning that as an IEnumerable. With me? Nothing too controversial about that. I've seen it a million times. Okay, cool. So if I run that, get products, can I scale this? Are we Electron too? We're Electron. Electron everywhere. The world doesn't run on Excel anymore, it runs on Electron. I can't hide that though.
Need hundreds of gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, that's right. It's just JavaScript everywhere. Cool. So get product, response is not happening. Could not send request. Am I not running? Oh, fix the build. Fail. I swear this worked earlier. Have I copied and pasted something? Marten API data. Oh, did I copy and paste something? No, that should be right. Marten API data. Marten API data. What have I done? I've done something stupid. It is in data module. Could not be found. Oh, I'm not using order. That's why I'm not bothering with order in here. So it doesn't know about it because I didn't copy it in. Customer, thank you. So the other thing, it doesn't touch the schema until it needs to do something with that particular object. All right, cool. So, this is fairly simple and non-controversial. So I'm calling the product endpoint and getting, all of the products. I'm going to quickly jump to another very helpful piece of thing. Who's used, actually, I keep forgetting, a bunch of you used Postgres. Who knows about PG stat activity? The ones that know the pain? Yeah. Who's used SP Who2 in SQL Server? Yeah? The ones that know the pain. So PG stat activity is sort of the equivalent of SP Who2. And it will show you the activity inside the database. Okay, so I've got a bunch of processes using just the Postgres, which is like our master database. And I've got a whole bunch of open connections to the Marten demo database. Now, some of them are here in my IDE, in my editor. But if I run this a bunch, so what have I got? I've got, how many rows have I got in here? 16 rows. Prod traffic, right? Load testing, that's right. Cool. So now I have 30 rows and a whole bunch of open connections on Marten demo. Now, like I said, this bit me in production twice until I figured it out, because eventually my service would get to a point where it says I don't have any more connections left in my connection pool. And that's Marten sitting on top of, what's the Postgres library? Thank you. NPGSQL. And I couldn't find this. I found eventually I found a hint at, the 30th post of a forum thread when I figured out what it was. It's not safe by default like Raven. It actually is. I was just holding it wrong. So this I think was your question around IEnumerables, because you saw I defaulted it to a to list. So what's happening here, and this is the biggest gotcha with Raven, because this code as a .NET developer that's used to using something like Entity Framework, seems completely non-controversial. Sorry, not that code. I'm looking at the wrong code. In my product controller, calling my repository, and then spitting out, which gets an enumerable, and I'm spitting that out from here. So what's actually going on here, and this was hard-earned wisdom. This query and where is not actually returning an enumerable. It's returning an Marten queryable. Because it's link, right? So you can do stuff after you've passed, a queryable around. So you might look at that and go, I'm disposing of the session, which should dispose of the underlying connection. But it doesn't. Because I'm returning a queryable, it leaves the connection open for me to query it again later on down the track. And because, we've got some abstractions and a couple of different layers on here, what's happening is my session is being disposed of when it returns back from the thing, but it's got these kind of orphan hanging connections and they're not disposed of inside PostgreSQL. And that will bite you in production. That will bite you very, very, very hard. So my reflex reaction is to toolist. Yeah. It's just like, yeah. You're just like, just trust me, one day, this will hurt. So when I found that and sort of discovered it, I decided to see if there was just a better way of doing this altogether. And which also covers Joseph's question about does it return 1,000 rows by default, is I've come up with this pattern over the years now that I've put into a bunch of things that I've built, and it's just a nice way to build APIs. In the real world where you do have lots of things and you want to have some paging data, is this pattern where I say I want page 1 and it gives me some totals. Again, if you're building APIs with like a sort of JavaScript front end or something like this, or even for integrations, again, stuff works in dev and it returns a bunch of stuff, but you don't want your customers hitting your API with 500,000 rows of data. So as a bit of a default, I've got this pattern that'll return total number of records, total number of pages, what the current page is, and then a result set of say 20 things. And this is just a pattern that has come in really, really, really handy on a bunch of different clients and a bunch of different apps. And so I've got this page of T class that is just something that I just copy into every project that I pretty much work on now. Yeah, everyone's kind of, well, anyone that's been bitten by an unbound result set in production has something like this. So I have that, and then I have a data extension here to do all of the ugliness around it. And you better be damn sure I'm calling to list in it. So basically I've got this thing, again, the code's here, you're welcome to steal it. Yes, yeah, I'll put it on GitHub and I'll put the link in the meetup. Did you register through meetup? Yep, yeah, I'll send the thing. Yeah, question?
I noticed that you didn't use the async version. Is there an async?
There is async for most of it, yeah. Yeah, and there is probably a reason for that. Like I didn't once, and I've just copied it everywhere. You're welcome to async all the things. Yeah, I was actually an async holdout for a long time, because I'm jaded. And then it got to a point where it's like you just can't avoid it anymore, so have to do it. So yes, there are async extensions. Sorry, question. Not inside a web app, not inside an API like this. And a lot of what I do is sort of APIs. And yeah, I mean, if you're building some kind of predicate builder where you wanted to pass queryable up the chain, then yeah, you certainly could. But, the style of app that I usually build are event-driven microservices where by the time you're calling an API, the data's already really in the right shape and you just want to spit it out and move on with your life. So with Marten, I've tended to not go with that sort of pattern. So.
You got a follow-up?
I'm saying, do you reckon, if you submit a pull request or something to add an option that would just ask them to do
Potentially, you also might get hit with you're holding it wrong. So,
Maybe
like,
there is
I mean,
that queryable that it returns. Maybe it's also disposable. Because you're disposing of your lightweight session there.
They've got an async enumerable support as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
There may be ways around it. Again, it's one of those things that I got burnt with a few years ago and found a solution and went, cool, I'll stick with that.
Decided to sit and materialize the list.
Yep, yep,
that's all.
yep. And a lot of what I do, like I said, is APIs on top of services. So this pattern where I'm saying, like, get me an ordered page of T where the key, and this is a little bit ugly. So if what I'm ordering by is a date, then that's kind of order by, product and date or product and string, whatever. It does all the sort of page maths for me. You can get the query stats out and return it, and then I just spit that back into the page. And I just use that as a default. Now it makes my APIs look really consistent and really nice, and I've not been bitten with a connection leak in production ever again. So I've got it, again, link's a little bit ugly for stuff like this, but I've got it kind of ordered forwards and ordered backwards. Bit of copy paste. Todd?
So, sorry, just clarifying, there's no way that you know of to tell it to dispose of the underlying Postgres connection?
Since I came up with this, I haven't gone and looked. To be honest. There may be now. There wasn't at the time, but this was a couple of versions ago. Someone may have come up with something because I know.
It seemed like a massive hole in the design.
Yeah.
Good deco on the connection.
Yeah, and it used to not. So like it was like something I solved when here's a solution, I'm sticking with that. But I find it makes the APIs really nice. And actually I will prove it. I'm going to just delete, so I'm going to cancel the process and start it again. And then I'm going to call the nicer one a bunch. So let's see, so our connection usage has dropped down to, I've got 16 rows here, and I can, load test this a whole bunch. And it's really not going to go up. Sorry?
What would Entity Framework do in the same scenario?
I don't know.
I can't remember
I don't know actually.
that being a problem.
It could be something inside of PostgreSQL. I actually don't know. I've not hit it in EF.
For what it's worth, you're kind of describing the same problem with HTTP client where it's meant to just be a singleton for the entire application. So it sounds like you've just got that issue.
Yeah, so it's disposing of the Marten bit, but Marten doesn't know that it's got some dangling connections inside. Yeah.
Thing where, in this case, it's not a singleton issue, but under the hood somewhere,
Yeah, there's just something orphan.
disposing of it.
And look, it's honestly been, other than like doing data migrations at scale, which is hard no matter where, when, and how. It's been really the only thing that's bitten me with Marten. And I just have a solution that I just drop into everything that I use. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to share that because if anyone picks up Marten after my say so, I don't want to get the blame for their production outage. So that's my solution. To that, mindful of time, there are a couple of other things I want to quickly show you, but does that all make sense? Yeah. I think that was all in that solution that I wanted to show. But yeah, that again, it's just a nice pattern for stuff like building APIs in general. I find that a nice pattern to work in. Yeah, that is all of that. But yeah, that is all in GitHub. The last thing I kind of wanted to show you was one of the other little superpowers. And I didn't write a code demo basically because there's a whole bunch of background learning you would need to do if you wanted to do it. So I've put some doco and some notes in this repo, and I'm going to show it to you. So it's a possibility, which is one of the things that Postgres does really quite nicely is full text search, which is kind of a bit ugly and a bit expensive to do in SQL Server, and very expensive to do with like Azure Search Services or something like that. I see your pain. Oh, yeah. Postgres, yeah, it's really good, and
Like you can almost get as far as you want to get to with just Postgres and full text search.
pretty much. So, but we've got these kind of JSON stores, right? But because we can go and select stuff out of it, that's not a particularly useful one. So where is it? Customer ID. Oh, was it email? No, not email. I call it. Did I not recreate the model? What was email? No. Anyway, what have I done wrong? You'd think so, but anyway, you know what I mean. We can go select stuff. So something I've done, and I'll show you the doco in a minute. Something I've done with this on a couple of different projects is used Marten to store the objects, like I showed you here, but then added full text search onto it by basically using that SQL syntax to pull out the relevant properties inside the document. And it works exceptionally well. I've done a couple of things on it. I've used it as a sort of headless content API for stuff, where I've actually used it as a proxy in between Umbraco, which doesn't go particularly quickly when you've got hundreds of thousands of documents in there. And I just load stuff out of Umbraco into a thing, and I've got, you know, a table with documents and a table with media, and then I full text all of the relevant properties in the documents, and I've got then a search API. Works really well. Another thing I did was an address search for some local government agencies where they had all of the sort of property boundary stuff in their systems, and we could load it out and then have an address kind of lookup search for within that local government area, and it works really, really well. So the way full text search works in Postgres is you basically create a materialized view and you tokenize the properties, and you can put different weightings on them and stuff like that, and then search on the view. So I didn't do a demo of that because it wouldn't have helped. What I have done is essentially written a little bit of a document about it. Is it the preview? Yes. So if that's something you're interested in, this article, this blog post has all of the theory about creating text search in Postgres. And then essentially what I've done, and this is code out of the app that I've used it for, is I had this document table that used Marten to store all the properties from a document that came out of CMS. And I pull out the title or the name and the synopsis, and I can weight different properties in there. So you create this materialized view. And then you create a full text gin index on the materialized view. And then I have something that every couple of minutes just runs this refresh materialized view command, and it rebuilds that view and text index. And then you can query it. And I think I use Dapper. No, I don't think I ever use Dapper. I think I just raw SQL connection stuff and data commands. Again, this query is specific to my needs, but what I'm trying to show you is that I've got my document table and my media table, and I'm joining it onto that search index view. And then I can use my search index to find the stuff and then go and join onto my document table to get content type aliases and subtypes and header images and the path and the slug and stuff like that. Using this TS query, which is the sort of tokenized search stuff that Postgres has. So if it's something you were interested in, you can use Marten as this really kind of flexible, handy, fast object store, and then join it onto your index stuff and get kind of this best of both worlds. It's kind of like where the Swiss Army knife thing came from. It's like, this thing is really useful. So if that's something you're interested in, all of the steps are there, but it will kind of be specific to your database and your object, what you would want to do, but the research is there and the sample code is there. So many questions. Yep.
So I've actually never really worked materialized views before, so what are they generally better for or used for?
In Postgres, yeah. So you create the view. So it basically creates a copy of the data. So that's what the materialization is. It goes and gets it and sticks it in storage. So it's not just a view that has to go and query into the stuff. It pulls it all out and kind of like a temp table, I guess. Like it's a view with storage.
It's
Yeah, pre-computed view with storage, and then you index. You create the text index on top of the view. Yeah, if you've got yes. Again, if you've got millions and rows and stuff like that. But again, like at that scale, there are other solutions to search. This is like, startups, small stuff, prototype. Most of us aren't working on, massive scale stuff. But as a tool for particularly, again, like at scale, you've got to be careful with any of your choices, right? Yeah. So again, I do this in a content management system that has, 100,000 rows. This view recalculates in a couple of seconds. Like it's not anything that's hurt me. If I had 5 million rows in there, I would be rethinking it. But at that point, I hopefully have enough revenue that I can go and use.
Every couple of minutes,
Yeah, like 10 minutes.
So it also depends on
How fast you want to recalculate, right? I'm backing this onto a content management system where, at best they might be publishing a document an hour. So if I'm not in search, it's on the front page. So who cares? Again, there are scales, trade-offs at scale of everything. But as the apps that most of us spend most of our time on, particularly in like startups and R&D and like rapid development stuff, this is something that I reach for quite a lot. Yep.
Sorry, I missed something. Why are you recalculating the materialized view?
So the materialized view, so this is just a Postgres quirk. So the materialized view basically takes a copy of the data in that view and stores it. So it backs the view with some storage. And so you need to refresh that. So this creates the view, right? Yes. Yeah. So I have a service with a background worker, and every 10 minutes it does it. So that creates it. And then I've got some code like in .NET, just on a sort of 10-minute worker. But you could have a cron job, however you like. I've just got this service. It's sort of self-contained, and every 10 minutes it creates a new SQL connection and just calls that command, which is refresh the materialized view search index, and it just picks up a copy, drops it into that spot.
So it's really no different to create
like a temp table.
Materialized view support, you could just create your own table.
You're
dropping and recreating a copy of the data every time.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little faster because it's not redoing schema, but yeah. Again, it's one of those things. I found it, I got it to work, it works really well.
I thought the idea of a materialized view was SQL, or your SQL engine maintains it for you.
And I guess that's one of the differences in SQL Server, and because SQL Server only got materialized views in like 2005 or something at enterprise level. And yes, it maintains it for you. In Postgres, something you got to refresh when you whatever period you want. That's all of the stuff I had prepared. But yeah, happy to throw any questions or. Yep.
Yeah. Does it also support geospatial types? And will they duplicate? Or do you
So
have to use it?
Postgres does. I've not duplicated a geospatial type from .NET into I don't know. Yeah, it does do that. Yeah.
Okay. And it's all the way to the full text search. Okay.
Oh, sorry, full text search into the geospatial stuff, or
No, it's
Marten
all the
into
way,
the
so you're using SQL.
I've not played with it. So.
With your materialized view, have you ever done anything clever like
No.
do some
Have you met me?
dirty detection?
Sorry?
Do something like it's dirty, so you want to refresh it.
I haven't. No, it's for the places I've used it. It's not really mattered. Like the rebuilding it cost is not something that's been an issue for me. So it's easier to just rebuild it. But you certainly could. You certainly could do that and go, when was the last index rebuild? When was the last content change? If the delta is big enough, yeah, absolutely, you could do that. Again, that's why, like, I didn't put this in the demo. I went, here's the research, here's how to do it. It's an idea you can play with. Yep.
It's probably back to the column tables and all that. You might have glossed over it. If you wanted to do something like, say, for example, extracting out something into a full text where you combine multiple
And create columns for all of it?
And will it concatenate those in? Will it be smart enough to do that?
No. No, I don't think it'll do that. No. No, that's kind of getting beyond the scope of what it's for, which is just a fast search lookup. No. You could probably do something with like doing the derived column on storage as a property, and it's not something I've ever wanted. Yeah. Question at the back?
So when you were setting up all your various documents and adding the extra indexable columns and stuff like that was all in that like services extension method, right? If you wanted to, you had like 100 different documents.
Yep.
And you then end up, and each of them is having, say, 1 or 2 extra columns. Is there a more readable, friendly way of doing that instead of having that?
Not out of the box, but I guess you could write an extension method that, like on called it. Yeah, you could write an extension method that went schema, do it my way, and it read you things out of a JSON document and loop through it. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. But no, the raw API is kind of for doing it that way. But yeah, you could absolutely write code to do whatever you want. Yep.
Is there any migration support for the actual content of the JSON document, or is it still roll your own if you want to do it manually, adding 50 properties and deleting 3 properties and so on?
You would want to do that yourself. Yeah, again, when I've had to do that, it had the thing that I was storing was semantically different enough that I created a new object representation and kind of on startup did that migration. And I had some period where some things were hitting the old one and some things were hitting the new one. And over the course of a few deployments, I migrated over. Same way you would do any kind of big migration at scale. You can't just magically do that stuff. You've got to kind of plan for it and do it over a couple of releases. So yeah, it's been very semantically different where I've had to do it. And honestly, that was only once or twice. A lot of this stuff sort of shakes out in the initial development of it. Yeah.
Does it support the concept of instructions for classes? So I could have a contact and then have a customer?
Yes, it does. And that's why it has this .NET type in there. So you can have some hierarchy and stuff in there. You say, I want row ID as a child, whatever.
Yeah, I also had a related question to that. Yep. So what about refactoring? So if you were to move this class somewhere,
yeah,
the namespace would change or abstract it?
If you were refactoring and you had complex hierarchies, yeah, you'd have to have some fun with that. I mean, I actually used it in 2 different namespaces from the same, and it's fine. It's just it matters under sort of.
Yeah. What if you rename the props?
You'd have to play with that. I've not needed to do it. Yeah, again, where I've had to rename a class, it's been semantically different enough. Yeah.
In a production instance where you were deploying that, so some entity turned out to be something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't pretend to have all of the answers. This is just like where I've used it and where I've gone wrong and what I've found. And again, the stuff I do a lot of is service-based stuff where the services storage is quite simple because the complexity happens in the handling of the events and the sagas, and the storage is like, I'm not doing complex storage. If you were doing that, you might run into a place where this is not the right tool.
So that's just a good way to implement a document database with a familiar infrastructure.
Yeah, that's right, and a link syntax that's kind of better than most things you're going to find. Yeah, Todd.
Sorry, you might have answered this question already, and I missed the answer. But with the
pay attention, Todd.
Column you've got there, if you refactor and move your class to a different namespace, does it keep it in the same table?
Yeah, I think it would update it when I saved it. So like in this point, like I actually had I saved the stuff in the console app and I loaded it from the web app, and it actually doesn't care. Yeah. It only cares at the time where you sort of trying to figure out some hierarchy stuff and it needs to do something complex. You got a question?
What type of rollback functionality is there for multiple documents? Maybe say your work was doing more than it
When you say rollback, like transactional rollback, yeah. So you can, yeah, in your unit of work, you can roll stuff back. Like, so it doesn't do anything until you hit save changes, much like Entity Framework.
There are different types of sessions. In Marten, so you can open a session which is transactional, and by the time you close and save changes, it saves everything atomically. Or you could open a session that essentially does not care about that and saves everything
as you go. Yeah. And there's also some. It's getting late. Sorry. This version thing will sort of do dirty write checking, stuff like that. Like if you've got a not the lightweight session when you go to save something, it saves the sort of dirty write stuff, dirty read where I might read it, something else reads and writes it, and then I'm trying to write back my version which is older than the one that just got written, and it uses that version stuff to handle that.
So that the last in doesn't clobber.
Exactly. So. Yep.
The last question for me is probably more Postgres sort of thing, but how does Marten sort of deal with sort of Postgres' rogue version checking? Because we've got Marten version checking, but can that work alongside Postgres?
I don't actually know. You'd have to throw Jepson at it to to find out. Yep.
I might have missed it, but how do you define the hierarchy? So like that table, it has the class name.
Yeah.
But how do you?
To be honest, I've never needed it. Again, there's heaps of documentation. It's really good. This was very much a kind of here's how I use it. Again, in a lot of the stuff I do, I'm not using complex hierarchies of stuff. Yeah, it's Yep.
When you talk about the refactoring it, is it as bad as like if you just rename one single property, you have to explicitly do something to?
You would, yeah. So if you've got
Any kind of model change is a point where you need to explicitly manage a database migration.
if you are you just need to think about it, right? So an example, I've had something where we had a document that we stored based on, a class, and it had a single, I don't even remember what it was, a single thing attached to it. So it was a date. And then we refactor it so you could do multiple things to this document. So now you had to have a series of dates. It's like, where you're going from like one thing, one property that becomes a collection. You just got to think about it. So I think in that, we had and I can't even off the top of my head remember what it was. So you have a stage where it's the singletons calls it, like the single thing is called that. And you put an S on so you've got two properties and you deploy that and you run it for a while and deprecate that one, and you could, if you wanted to expedite it, you could on startup run a migration that like loads all those things out. So yeah, like if you're doing like Entity Framework, you would do a deployment that updated your schema and ran a big query to kind of repopulate it the right way. This doesn't kind of have that. I think there are ways to do it, like you can run some JavaScript functions on migration and do it, but it's just this icky stuff that I've never wanted to touch. But it's
pretty good.
Yeah. But yeah, so what we've done is just have stuff side by side. And then...
The question or concern is essentially like any time you refactor a class in any form,
Yep.
a simple spelling mistake in a column name or something.
Then it's not going to come out, correct, because you're loading you're deserializing a JSON document into your object, and yes, if they don't match, it's not going to work. So yes, if you are going and renaming stuff or deleting properties or changing the meaning of properties, yeah, you're going to want to think about that stuff.
It's got good patch support so you can do renames.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's still fundamentally a document store.
It's a document, it's a JSON store, right? Yeah.
Showing the largest flaw in documents.
Yeah. It's a useful one. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
I know you said you're not talking about the sourcing
Yep.
and then streaming stuff, but I've only played with the basic features myself.
Yep.
Do you know like
I've literally never used it.
so like as it creates documents?
Literally never used it. Never used it. Literally never used it. You probably know more than me. So next speaker next month. No, I've literally not needed it. When I've done event sourcing stuff, I've rolled my own, and it's been on projects that happen to be on SQL Server. So I've, literally never touched it. Talk to Todd. You can get the grilling about refactoring. Any more? I'm going to hand it while we're thinking about last couple. You get a JetBrains. All right. Well, this is a fresh one with no dodgy error messages. Who else asked a lot of questions? You asked a bunch of questions. You have a JetBrains license? You've got everyone? Who asked a bunch? You asked some. Todd, you've got one. You've got one. I know you've got one. Do you have a JetBrains license?
No, I'm
Yep.
fine now.
Do you have a JetBrains license?
I do not.
Would you like a JetBrains license?
Yeah, what?
You can learn the deliciousness of Rider
Cool, thank you.
for stumping me on event sourcing. All right, got time for about one more.
I have a question. Is it web scale?
Yes, it's web scale. So I've used this on something that was genuinely large, and yeah, it webbed. and it did that while actually writing stuff to disk. So, has anyone ever been burnt by MongoDB? Yeah, a few people. So yeah, Mongo was very, very fast. So the joke for those of you, Mongo was very fast in benchmarks because it would commit stuff to memory and maybe write it to disk. Maybe. There was no guarantees that it made the disk. And when the hype really started to happen, it's probably 2010, 2011. I remember sitting down and I grabbed a bunch of NoSQL databases and I wrote a very, very simple stress test. It was literally, I think, generate 1 million documents, insert them as fast as I possibly could, and then see how many of that made it to storage. And Mongo did abysmally, and Raven did worse. And the only one that I could play with that actually stored them all for me and gave them back was CouchDB, which nobody remembers anymore because they tried to do this whole mobile sync play and it just failed for them entirely. Couch was cool. And what Couch did that Mongo didn't was you could actually, Mongo, I believe it's changed now. I know it's changed now. A Mongo index, you had to re-index all the time, much like the materialized view in Postgres. So you actually needed a cron job to rebuild all your indexes. It's fine for a full text search, but for something like Mongo, not only was it not storing it, but even if it stored it, you couldn't find it. And yeah, Couch actually, and this is back in 2010, 2011, had kind of live re-indexing of JSON documents, and Couch was cool. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for my impromptu database talk.
Thank you very much, Damian. I'm going to get close to you again so people on the stream can hear me. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and attending. Obviously, the more people that are here, the more questions, the more conversation that happens, the better the event is. So we really appreciate all your attendance. As I said, we're here every first Thursday of every month. We advertise what it is beforehand on Meetup and in various other locations. We're always looking for speakers. We're a pretty friendly, approachable group. We look poorly upon hecklers. So if there's any heckling,
But you mean by giving them speaking spots?
Yeah. If they're speaking, they're getting the heckling. We don't allow heckling or anything like that. So it's a pretty good spot to try stuff out and try presenting if you want to. And we can also give you tips and assistance if you're looking for help with some of that stuff. So please reach out if you've got some ideas. If your company wants to sponsor, we will let you, even if you're not talking, we're happy for you to jump up at the start and give a little bit of a spiel about your company, looking for devs, anyone looking for clients, anything like that. So if you're happy to sponsor, also reach out and talk to us. Sponsorship usually is just buying some food or drinks, and it's a couple of $100 if you want to do that. So please do reach out. Big thank you to Damian again for coming along to talk to us tonight, and thank you for Todd and Telstra Purple and everyone else for helping out, running the event and hosting and all the other stuff. So thank you. Last thing, a few of us often go over the road there for a few beers if anyone wants to come along afterwards. So we got lots of pizza and stuff. So if you feel free to take pizza home with you. Otherwise, Telstra Purple ends up having it in their fridge for about 2 weeks before someone throws it out. So thank you and good night.
Thank you very much.